45 away.
Okay, Jay.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Well, welcome, everyone. As Scott mentioned, Nathan was unable to join us today, so I'm going to kind of fill in for a few minutes here, and then we'll get the ball rolling. What I really wanted to talk about a little bit was what does broadband look like, and we were going to do the Southwest Minnesota data poll there. We did the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition, of which I am the chair, conducted an internet broadband speed test during the last about year and a half. Statewide, we had almost 60,000 total tests. And really, when we looked at all of the counties and all of the tests, I was not proud to say that we had number 87 out of 87 counties in Redwood County with connectivity. So we have a huge issue in front of us. We also, of course, have Rock County, which was the first county to get wired with the border-to-border broadband program. Lincoln County just got up to speed here last summer, did a lot of work around that. So the speed test, what it does is we've got available for all 60,000 of those tests. What we have is we have the provider, we have where the test was taking place, the city, the county, the township. We can even get longitude and latitude if anybody's interested in those, in that specific of data. But what we're doing is we're looking at where those spots are, where the holes are in terms of coverage. Now, we've done some of the preliminary work for our comprehensive economic development strategy, looking at what the download speeds were. And what we do is we're looking at the averages. In our county averages, we don't have anybody that's over that 100 megabyte yet. 25.3 is considered broadband from the state, but that's the old standard, and it doesn't look like we're going to make the old standard before the new standard kicks in. So one of the things that we're talking about here and why we're working with Blandon and why the regional effort is to try and get some more momentum built up in our rural areas to try and get these broadband speeds up before the new ones come into play and then hit the new ones. Because if we don't start working towards the new ones now, we're going to always be behind. And we don't want to be behind. I think if anything, COVID has shown everybody the importance of being able to work from home, to be able to have your kids take classes from home. I know schools started in a lot of communities. I know Albert Lee and Austin and some other areas had issues with having to quarantine. I was just reading the paper, 380 kids got quarantined after the school started. If you don't have good broadband, you can't react to these kind of things. And I think this is just going to be the way it is in the future. And so we need to establish that we don't have broadband in these areas. And then we need to work with the legislature. We need to work with the Office of Broadband and the border-to-border broadband program and continue to get some funding for these things and get these services out to our rural communities. So what we're looking at, we did have a fairly good year at the legislature with $70 million towards the border-to-border broadband program, and I'm sure the Office of Broadband more detail about that. So that's kind of on the spur of the moment, off the cuff, what we've got going on in terms of the speed test. We do have all the data. So right at the moment, we're looking at analyzing it just for our 9 counties, and I'm sure that 6W and MMDC are both looking at that data to include that in their comprehensive economic development strategy as well. All right, Scott, back to you.
Thanks, Jay. Fabulous. Greatly appreciate that overview and all the leadership you're providing in that space. We'll transition to our next speaker, Todd Hagan from Ellers Public Finance Advisors. We're so grateful to have Todd with us today. He and his colleagues at Ellers have advised cities and counties and townships throughout Minnesota and the upper Midwest for a very long time and have been great friends to rural. So Todd, I will change the spotlight, but feel free to take it away.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody, for having us. Again, great introduction. Want to talk to you a little bit about the financing mechanisms that are allowed and sort of offered through the state legislature for you folks to contribute to the broadband process here. So anytime I kind of talk about me or Ellers, could be talking about your own financial advisor. We're just one of 4 or 5 in the state, that helps municipalities issue bonds and kind of help with economic development. So I'm kind of here as a neutral party. Just want to inform you folks of what my experience has been throughout the years. I think I was just lucky enough to kind of get into the forefront of broadband way before the border-to-border grants were available. We also took on one really successful, city-owned broadband system down in Windham. It's Windham Net, and I think it's one of the most successful sort of city-owned networks in the state. We always have to be so careful that because there's competition involved when you own your own system, that that's a lot. It's not for everybody. So we've got the border-to-border grants going on now, and what's been most popular has been municipalities not owning their own system, but just going ahead and helping a service provider perform that duty, whether we grant them the money, right, through bonds or cash or whatever, to get that done, because we know that we've been told that they're not going to come unless we subsidize them, right, somehow. So there's been another 1 or 2 municipalities in the state that sort of decided to own their own conduit infrastructure part. So we partnered up with some service providers we issued bonds for the fiber to go into the conduit within a city. This is, so it's a smaller area, and then they own that until the service provider pays up their lease payments, which pay the bond payments, and then they just get that back for $1, and then the city doesn't own it anymore, and the service provider does, so that too ends up with the service provider owning the system and not the municipality. So I think we want to try to stay away from any ownership here. So we are talking about granting funds to a private service provider to get the job done. So it's been my experience, that I know there's no more CAF2 funding, and don't question me on all these acronyms. I'm just giving you a broad brushstroke of sort of what's been out there and what's not available anymore, and sort of why we're kind of in a pickle sometimes finding the gap, to fill the gap to get the projects done. So, it's my experience that that's no longer available to the service providers to provide kind of the 4 food groups that we needed to get the project done. And I think what can fill that right now is ARPA funds. And I'm going to get to that in a few minutes, but that seems to be where sort of our gravy train is, because that's allowable within certain speeds to use the American Rescue Plan dollars to help fill these gaps. So without CAF2, then we've got ARPA, and sometimes we're off to the races. So what else have to be mindful? I know service providers are having some difficulty providing service throughout the whole area that maybe we'd be talking about. So when we go in for the border-to-border grants, which I think we're due here in September, they sort of get awarded in November and December. Sometimes there's service providers are having difficulty being able to sort of overlap with maybe not necessarily an incumbent, but a service provider that's one locations, one locations within an auction that's within your service area. So sometimes some folks get kicked out and won't be serviced by that particular provider. And so that also presents some difficulties in be able to hook up the whole area with sort of a new provider. So when we talk about how we finance these, we've done them. There's not a whole lot of choices as far as bonds are concerned. So I know in townships we use subordinate service districts. That helps out a lot. We've changed the legislature on that a few years ago, just by chance. And now it's come in very handy that we're able to provide funds to a service provider through issuing bonds through a subordinate service district with townships. So that's pretty popular if the township is not being completely serviced by that particular provider. Otherwise, we go for and that's through service charges throughout a pocket of township area, so to speak, or a pocket of a county area, which would be a township. If the whole area is being serviced by this provider, then we're able to issue what's called a tax abatement bond. And that basically, long and the short of that, is it's a tax throughout the whole township area. And that's a pretty popular way to do this. So and then I get a lot of questions on, well, can we special assess folks in the area too? And there's been concerns using special assessments as an option if it's even legal. So one of the problems with special assessments is the ability to appeal, right, the amount of the assessment. And then if there's litigation, that can get expensive. And I hear it's no longer covered by insurance. So one of the benefits of the SSD for townships is that residents petition for the service and the costs associated with the service. And so that seems to be, a better way to go. Another concern about special assessments, if you look in the law, that you need to find that the service to be provided by the project will not compete with other private service providers. So, I'm not a lawyer, but I've kind of gone through lots of different iterations of this. So different attorneys might have different opinions, but this is just FYI stuff that always comes up in conversations of sort of how do we charge the residents for this grant that we're going to give the service provider. So if you look at the ARPA funding that's coming down the pike, I think you got some time yet to apply for that. And if you haven't, get to applying for that, because you don't have to spend it until 2026. And so any money that you get, remember, and I don't know if you know that, but that the interest earned off of that while it's kind of sitting around is yours to keep. It's my understanding. And then if you don't use it, you can give it back. But I would, recommend that we would that all municipalities would sign up for that free money and at least kind of put it in your back pocket. I know the feds send it to the state and the counties, and then I think cities and townships have to get it from the counties, I believe. So an eligible use for the ARPA funds, which is the free money I'm talking about, not bonds, is that one of the eligible uses is broadband infrastructure investment. I think it has some speeds attached to it too. But I think, there's a way to get around that by going through your consultant or financial advisor, any expert that you've got, maybe your township attorney, county attorney, city attorney can kind of help with that, and bond counsel, those folks. So there is specifically listed in there, unlike it wasn't listed in there in the CARES Act funding, a year or so ago. So it is here. And so that's a nice thing to tap into if you can at least have that handy, because you can use it for other sources too. Eller sent out an email blast a while ago to our clients that so we've got some experts at our office that can walk you through some of that too. And like I said, I think you can still apply for that now, and it's a great resource. So another question is, hey, some townships, municipalities might have the cash, right, to fund their share instead of issuing bonds, and maybe they never thought of the ARPA funds. But so there's also a sort of a process you have to go through for giving actually cash to a private entity, because these are municipal funds, right? These are probably taxpayer dollars. We can't just kind of willy-nilly go and just give our money away that we've probably taxed the residents for, right? So there's got to be some process and accountability and things like that we have to follow, which is good, right? Because it takes the pressure off of us. So we know we did it right, and we don't feel guilty at the end of the day that if somebody comes asking or knocking at the door that we might not have a good answer of, where it went and why it went there, and even if they completed the project, right? So generally speaking, I'll talk about the business subsidy kind of aspect to this too, which is a great thing to have in the law right now that does give us the ability to, draft up agreements and things like that with the service provider. But the simplest, a lot of the times, what a city and a county can do if they have an HRA or an EDA, or an HRA with EDA powers, economic development authorities, they're able, through their enabling resolution, if you take a look at that and the law, that they are able to provide loans and grants to private entities. So that's already in that entity's purpose in life, right? So that's a pretty nice way to go, because it's more or less in place already. Some townships, if they go through a county, they can kind of get there that way, give it to the county, and the county sort of, distributes it through their EDA or HRA with EDA powers. But there's another carve out called an Area Redevelopment Act, which is a way, there's a process for a township to act as that kind of authority. We call this a redevelopment project. There's some public hearings we have to go through. There is a little bit of a process, but then they get to be able to undertake industrial, recreational, commercial, and manufacturing type projects and local, regional area as a local area redevelopment agency. And so we're thinking of doing that with one of the townships we've been talking to in Candy, Ohio County. And I think that'll work pretty slick, but it's always a surprise to folks that, hey, we've got the cash, and what do you mean we have to go through a process to give it away? But I think at the end of the day, we get those agencies and entities established or use one that's existing. We have a development agreement or a business subsidy agreement that sort of is the paper trail and allows us to implement checks and balances to make sure the project's done, and where the money came from and all the triggers that need to go along with giving that money away to make sure that it's going to the project and the project will get complete. So there's all sorts of teeth you can put in that, and recommend we go through this process that's obviously part of it, and it has to be. So when we issue bonds, like let's say the tax abatement bonds, that's about a 5-month process to get through that. Issuing market rate bonds or going out to the public market, or we can go with local banks if it's a smaller bond issue. There's subsidy agreements we need to draft. There's grant agreements with the state of Minnesota if it's border to border grants involved. So there's that kind of drafting that the bond attorney is going to draft, and then your financial advisor will help with the bond part. So, there's a tax abatement hearing, there's a business subsidy public hearing we have to go through. And that's usually, I don't see any issues with that. Most of the time at those public hearings, the residents want to know more about, what it's going to cost, per month for the service, how fast it is and all that. They're all getting excited or a little leery about the service provider and what they can do for them that hasn't been done yet in the past, and very, very little questions to me and maybe the city attorney or township attorney on the process. So it can be exciting times, or there can be a question on tax impacts, right? What's this going to cost me for the bond? And then they'll ask, the service provider, whether it be CenturyLink or FrontierNet or whoever, or CTC, what's this going to cost me per month for the product? And then, a lot of times, maybe you folks have gone through the rating agency process and all that too. I mean, we're issuing a bond. So it's the same kind of thing. If it's large enough, going out to the public market, we're going to issue a bond. We're going to go through the same process that you've done for maybe a street project or a water sewer project or anything like that. But the difference is that we've got to wait till we get awarded, the border to border grant, and wait for the service provider to do all the numbers, make sure and see what our share is. Now, a lot of the times that stuff's got to be done by application time, right, in September. Because when you get awarded, they're going to show in that grant agreement or the award documents all of, your share and service provider share, and border to border, and everything else that's going to go in there to complete the project. So a lot of this legwork I'm talking about, numbers wise, before we go through this process, has to be done, I think, particularly before and during application stage. And then you can accept it or reject it or whatever at the end. But those ducks have to be typically in a row. And I'm talking about starting out the bond process or cash or whatever process we go through. That's after we're awarded the grant. And a lot of times that happens in like the March after the year we get the grant, or a little later on. So the bond process, that doesn't happen, before or during the application stage. This is all like, hey, let's get going. We've got all the funding. Let's get moving forward. So a subordinate service district, if you're a township, takes about 7 months to get done because, we got to go through sort of the petition period. There's a 60-day reverse referendum period we have to kind of wait for. So that adds a couple months to that process. So just to keep in mind, that takes a little bit longer. And so those things need to be ironed out. So we have ample authority to go with tax abatement bonds. If you're a township, subordinate service district bonds. I'd shy away from improvement bonds unless your attorneys and financial advisors say, yeah, you can do this, go for it. And then cash, right, can either come from your cash balance, ARPA fund cash, things like that. So let's not forget about those types of things too. And so in amongst the process, I talk about business subsidies, and that's kind of it's a really nice thing that's in the law right now. That so what we do is we dovetail a business subsidy agreement, which is like a development agreement. You guys have probably seen, like maybe on tax increment or tax abatement deals or whatever. It's the same kind of thing. It's the teeth that we all put in there to give the money to the private sector. And then business subsidy allows us to be transparent with the public, right? So if it's over $150,000, we have to hold a public hearing on that, too. So there's got to be, some legal hearings, and then I guess I'd suggest even some, public informational meetings ahead of that, because, then the legal meetings will go a lot easier and quicker that way. Can you get those out of the way? But I know it's been my experience with all of this, whether it's cash or whether it's borrowing, that the general public really needs to, feel that they're involved in this and that they've been within the process, or they've been notified of information. And I think you got to get that out directly, rather than saying, hey, it's been on our website, we meet every month, you can come to these meetings. So I think the public participation is huge, and that's all they want. It's been my experience. They just want to feel the love right there, and just want to be part of the process, because a lot of these folks aren't paying attention to, regular city meetings or county meetings or town meetings or what have you. So that's something to be aware of. And again, like in counties too, just kind of giving away, again, the ARPA money. If it's given away cash through that means, you don't have to go through a business subsidy process, but you do have to have what they call, I think, a sub-recipient agreement. And that, again, is kind of a development agreement. So I think in the back of your mind, always think that, hey, we should have an agreement all the time for all of this stuff. Never let the money go without any kind of agreement, whether it be a business subsidy agreement, the grant agreement, or a sub-recipient agreement of some kind or whatever. Because some of these laws that we're going under, some require different processes, and some mostly the ability to give money to the private sector really falls within kind of the primary law that's governing that particular avenue of money, right? So ARPA has its own sign off on, hey, this is legal and everything, we're good with that. So that's sub-recipient agreement. And then bonds say, the bond issue authority we're running under says, yeah, we can do this. It's a public purpose. It's providing a service. And then we have to have a business subsidy agreement. And if it's cash, you got to go through those preliminary sort of process there too. And again, we would be looking at a business subsidy agreement as well. So one thing, and I kind of want to leave you with this, is one thing we've been working on here at Ellers, working through Minnesota Association of Townships and maybe the county, AMC conference folks, is to, I always get a question, like if we're taxing the whole township, what do we, the farmers are going to get hit pretty hard, right? So I talked to our school district folks over here and see how they've kind of handled it. And there is a part of the law that I'm trying to modify that tracks the school building project sort of relief, right, for farmers. And the long and the short of it is that the state pays a portion of any bond issued for a school building project approved by the voters. So the state pays a percentage of the tax bill, and it's phased in over time. So for instance, I'm going to try to piggyback border to border and all this kind of stuff on there and see if we can get this through, because obviously it's something the state wants to see done, is higher speed internet. And so it's kind of a tiered system. So like, for instance, in 2018 and 19, the credit was 40% and 50% for taxes payable in 20, 55 in 2021, 65 in 2022, and 70% in 2023. So for instance, if the voter debt levy is $100,000 for a farm for a year, by the time the credit is fully phased in, their annual bill will be $30,000 after the state credit. So the credit in that case is automatic reduction of the tax bill. There's no application needed. And I think, living through this thing for many years and listening to, all the comments throughout these process, that's the one that's kind of sticking with me right now. So I'm kind of on a mission to get that through for the high-speed internet and this border-to-border grant stuff. And I think that's something maybe the state will hopefully perk up and see that that's also something that might be just as important as those school district bonds too. So I'm up for any questions you guys have, and that's pretty much all I have is a brief overview. I just wanted, again, to give you enough information so the light bulb will go off and you'll either talk to your financial advisor or your bond attorney or your city, county, township attorney and say, hey, I heard that somewhere from some guy, and I just want to go through this before we go too far. I just want to ask a question. So thank you.
Thank you, Todd, and for all that you've done for this presentation. As we transition to our next speakers, it's a couple of things for folks that have joined since we started. Please put your questions in chat. Jack and Michelle are eagerly monitoring that for our Q&A at the end. And also a huge shout out, State Senator Gary Dames. Thank you, Senator, for joining us. We're so glad to have you on here from District 16. We sincerely thank you for all your leadership in this space for Southwest Minnesota and for all that you've done during the pandemic to ensure capital comes to our main streets to get projects done, especially with broadband and childcare and housing and workforce and all of the issues facing our region. So thank you, Senator, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to shout out to Gary Dames. I'm from Redwood Falls, Gary. I don't know if you remember, I used to mow your lawn out at out at your house when you
Oh,
were
absolutely.
at Baker Brothers Motors. Yeah, you bet.
I didn't make that connection. Thank
Nice to see you're here, and I appreciated the job.
That's a good one. No, thanks for that. We'll transition to our next set of speakers to talk about broadband grant programs. I'll tee up the spotlights here in a minute, but we have Bree Mackey from the Office of U.S. Senator Tina Smith, who's been a great champion for all of Southern Minnesota and a great friend and advisor to me in this space. So Bree, glad to have you. Jen Frost from Deed's Office of Broadband Development. Many of you may remember her and recognize her name, previously serving the communities of Swift County. So Jen, great to have you. And Diane Wells, also from Office of Broadband Development. And we thank you for your leadership. So I'll turn it over to you, and you can decide who goes first.
I think that the torch was thrown at me to start. So thank you all for having me here today. Just a couple of things as I get started. Just if you didn't see already, Bernadine did a really wonderful thing for me in putting a link on the chat about the Broadband USA from NITA. I would encourage everybody to go on that website and sort of scan through. It is a really easy document or web page there that goes through all of the funding and how you can apply and request fiscal recovery funds. There is $350 billion in that fund for territories, local government, tribal governments, etc., to help with relief because of the pandemic. And though Ted was also explaining some of the ARP, so I just also wanted to make sure that if you don't know this, as many of you are maybe nonprofits or school districts that don't directly have the ability to apply for these funds, work with your local counties and local other government agencies that are able to, because I do know that there's a lot of partnerships happening at county levels where they can designate funding for transportation or to school districts or broadband pieces, and really creating some pretty incredible partnerships across the state because of this access to additional funding. So if you are not one of those that can directly apply for funds, I would still go on and take a look and then have a conversation with your local agencies. I also just, thanks again, Todd, for some of the background information that you gave on the RDOF stuff. And we all know, and I've talked to many of you before, the frustrations with the RDOF auction. And so just a couple updates from our office. We have a meeting set up, Adam Schiff from our DC team, as well as myself, with FCC chairperson's office next week to really ask some critical questions regarding the RDOF auction. And we recently had a meeting with some of our local cooperatives that are doing broadband, and they have also highlighted some questions that they have. I would just like to throw that out to the group as well, and I'll put my email address in the chat, but if there are specific questions or concerns that you think that I'm not necessarily aware of or that I should raise as I'm having this conversation with the FCC on the RDOF auction, please just send me a quick email, and I'm happy to try to dig and get some answers for you. And even Diane might have some when I stop talking and pass the torch to her. But there was yesterday a notification from FCC that they did approve 466 winning bids on the auction, and that was with 13 RDOF winners. So more information to come on that, but that's sort of the news flash that passed through yesterday. Let's see. As far as federal additional fundings that could or may be coming, at least from the work that, we're working on is we have a couple big things happening in DC, one being the reconciliation plan, and the other is this giant infrastructure bill. So I do want to just highlight that in the reconciliation plan, there is internet affordability and advanced communication program that has $11 billion in the plan, right, or in the budget per se right now to continue to provide working class families connected devices, extending FCC remote learning, 911 center modifications, and long-term solutions to broadband. So when and if the reconciliation package passes the way that it is currently there, there's some additional funding for broadband, as well as, like I said, in the infrastructure package, there are basically 4 big areas that cover broadband. And I'm happy to send more information out, but just want to highlight 2. One is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program that, if passed the way that it is, would give each state a minimum of $100 million to deploy broadband in grant programs competitively. And because we have such a robust program and incredible employees with the Office of Broadband in Minnesota, I think that this funding would be well used and also implemented in an effective, quick way once the funding comes to Minnesota. And the other thing I just want to highlight is there is enabling middle mile broadband infrastructure, which has a $1 billion in the infrastructure package. And this is something that we have heard many times from our cooperatives who are doing some of those gap fillings that are needed to get to our customers and our citizens that are lacking in broadband. So I think, unless I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but just know, even as late as yesterday, a senator decided to co-sponsor a new bill on broadband, and that's the Device Access for Every American Act. And what that would be is creating a voucher program for devices for families, students, low income, and then also require FCC to establish minimum standards on connected devices. So know that this area is really, I haven't been in the business of broadband as long as many of you probably have, but I have been doing broadband for over 6 years. And I will just say it's a very exciting time to see all of the funding streams that are coming in, and just that the pandemic has really added to the awareness of how important this is to telehealth and our students and our families, and just, bridging those inequities that really are long overdue. So with that, I'm going to stop and let Diane tee up anything that I've missed.
Thanks, Bree and Scott. I'm going to substitute in for Jen. We originally were dividing these up because we thought we'd have travel time, but since they're all virtual now, I can just do all of them for consistency's sake.
Sounds great.
But we are very happy to have Jen working in our office. She's been great. So sorry we took her away from you, but that's your loss. So I'll talk a little bit about the Border to Border grant program and then where we're at right now. I do have a slide deck that I prepared that's similar to what I'm doing in the other regions, and I can pass that along. It has some additional information in it that I won't have time to cover. But basically, since 2014, the Border to Border grant program has been around, and to date, we have awarded funding that is bringing broadband service to almost 57,000 households. And the purpose of the program is, we don't regulate broadband service, so we don't have a stick of regulation. We can't tell providers where they have to go and what they can charge and what speeds they have to offer. So we have to use the carrot, which is the grant program, to try to help bridge the cost gap to make some of these more rural areas that otherwise would be too expensive to serve, to make the costs workable for providers. And so there's a list of who's eligible to apply to that grant program in statute. And we have had a funding from general fund appropriation for 6 of the last 7 years. And that's been because Minnesota had run a budget surplus For fiscal year 22 and 23, the legislature decided to fund the program with federal funding, with the money in the ARPA plan. So while we have run the program one way for the past 6 funding rounds, we might see some differences coming up for the next 2 federally funded grant rounds. But normally what we do would be to distribute it in a single competitive grant round. By state law, the technology must be scalable to 100 megabits symmetrical. And by state law, we were capped at awarding $5 million to a single project. And by state law, we were capped at funding only up to 50% of the eligible expenses. And by state law, the grant awards are to be geographically dispersed. And I emphasize state law because, and I can read to you what the statute that was passed in the 2021 session says. The Commissioner of Employment and Economic Development must prepare and submit an application to the United States Department of the Treasury requesting that 70 million of Minnesota's capital projects fund allocation be awarded to the state. The commissioner must submit the application required under this paragraph by the later of September 30th, 2021, or 90 days after the date on which the United States Department of the Treasury begins accepting capital projects fund applications. And the commissioner must specify in the application that the award will be used for grants and the purposes specified in our grant program. And the commissioner does have the latitude to temporarily modify program standards under MnSTAT 116J.395 to the degree necessary to comply with federal standards for funding received under this section. And so, since we don't know yet what the federal funding requirements are going to be, because Treasury has yet to issue the guidance, there may be things we have to do under those federal guidelines. There may also be some things we want to do to incent the grants to go to the areas that are unserved today. What we're hearing and what we saw with NTIA funding and our small cities funding that used some HUD CARES Act funding was they were paying 90 to 100% of the infrastructure costs. And that was getting some applications in from some of these really, really hard to serve areas. So just personally, I'm a little concerned if our state law cap of 50% remains in place, we may not get the applications from the areas that don't have any other option but satellite service, if they can even get that. So those are all things that we'll have to be looking for. And because we don't have Treasury guidance yet, we have not been able to open up our grant round. Once we have that guidance, once we understand how to apply for the funding, how we may need to modify the grant application and that process, then we will open it up as soon as we can. Because of Minnesota's short construction season, which it's not an issue in the southern states, but our ground, usually providers can't get into the ground until about mid-May, and they're froze out by late October, mid-November, depending on the weather. There's only so much you can do in a construction season. So, and they do their plans in February and March for that construction season. So if we're not able to open up the grant round, get the applications, make the decision and announce the awards and get contracts signed, it is possible we will lose the 2022 construction season for this grant round. And I don't want to scare anybody, but I just want to make people aware that that is a possibility. So that capital projects funding is coming from ARPA. We know there is state and local fiscal recovery funding. You've been talking about what you can do with your local fiscal recovery funds. To date, the state has decided not to use any of the state fiscal recovery funds for broadband. It isn't allowed use, but it's one of many allowed uses, so that is understandable. And I touch on a couple of other funding opportunities, USDA Community Connect, and these will be in the link that Bernadine sent around. That last application window closed in December of 2020. We're waiting for that to reopen again, and that's a real good rural program. Minnesota's had 5 or 6 projects, millions of dollars from USDA for that. USDA Reconnect, that's another program. We've had 2 rounds of funding, and I think we've had 3 projects in Minnesota. Round 3 should be opening very soon. Again, it's a USDA program, so it focuses more on rural, but very beneficial. We've talked a little bit about the FCC Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. And Bria's right, there was just another announcement of groups yesterday, and Farmers Mutual did get approved in its long form. Lots of other applications for Minnesota that we're waiting on. And then just to give you an idea of how oversubscribed some of these programs are, in the Consolidated Appropriations Act that was passed in December of 2020, the NTIA had 2 programs that they're administering, a broadband infrastructure program. They had $288 million. The applications were due August 17th. They received $2.5 billion in requests. So that was almost 10 times as much money as they have. NTIA also has a tribal connectivity program, and that's for infrastructure and digital equity. They had $1 billion to award. They received $5 billion in requests. So the tribal areas were really being aggressive for that money, and that's great. And then the FCC emergency broadband benefit, I just want to make sure that you're telling all of your eligible households that they can get up to a $50 credit on their broadband bill, because affordability is the other issue with broadband that we're now more readily able to address with this FCC benefit. And Bree talked about making that funding permanent in some of the legislation that's pending. But the subscription rate, I think I saw yesterday, is 5.5 million households nationwide. That is way undersubscribed. So there are lots of eligible households that are not signing up for that program. We don't know if it's because it sounds too good to be true, or if they haven't heard about it, or they haven't heard from someone they trust that it really is a program that they can use. But really would be great if we could drive more usage to that FCC emergency broadband benefit. It is going to be available, I think, for sure through this school year anyway, because of the low subscription rate that it's been seeing. And then I won't touch any more on the ARPA funding or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, because they've been covered, but happy to try and answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Diane. We're grateful for this overview and all that you're doing at DEED. So hang in there, a lot to manage, and we sure appreciate this very much. We will keep moving and transition. I'm going to introduce Dawn Hegland from Upper Minnesota Valley RDC, who's going to moderate our stakeholders panel. This is a chance for you to hear directly from real rural leaders in healthcare, in business, and in K-12 education. So Dawn, take it away.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I want to thank Bree for actually teeing up kind of the conversation about talking about how important it is to really think about the application of broadband in our communities and the impact that it makes every day for our educators and healthcare and businesses. And to that end, we selected 3 industry representatives to share a little bit about how it is important in their industry and what they're doing about it. So I want to introduce 3 of our guest speakers today. Eric Bierke, who's the CEO of Madison Healthcare Systems. He'll be talking in a minute. Wayne Wormstead, who's the superintendent of Windham Area Schools, and Ryan Lang of Lang Egg Systems. And I'll let you each just go through in that order, and you can reintroduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how broadband has been, how it is important in your industry, and what you see for the future of broadband. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Don. Again, I'm Eric Bierke. I'm the CEO here at Madison Healthcare Services in Madison, Minnesota. And we are an independent healthcare organization. So we do have a hospital, clinic, and a care center attached. So, coming into this, and when Don asked me to speak on this, I'm thinking, well, broadband, to me, it's like, we need to have it. Our patients need to have it. Our community needs to have it. And then listening through the speakers already on the session, it's, well, that's probably the easy answer, but all the hard work is to get it there, and get it to our patients and get it to our communities. And I think there's a lot of people and a lot of smart people that can make that happen. It's, how quickly can we do it? So a couple things, on the healthcare front, obviously we all know COVID has hit us. And so that did a fast track in the healthcare environment as to how we use broadband in a way of working with our patients, especially in the rural areas. I mean, we were dabbling in it, with telemedicine, telehealth, whatever you might want to call it, with specialists, with primary care, with maybe some, special health problems that people may have. They're on monitors or whatever it might be. But when COVID hit, when really it became that social distancing thing, it fast tracked so many things in our industry that it pretty much woke it up to say, okay, we got to catch up with the rest of just the economy in general. And so, in rural, there's still a divide. I don't want to say divide. There's a difference between, say, an urban setting and rural in regards to having access to different care. And so then when that care can't be done in person even, and not having the broadband access, it makes it even worse. And so there's kind of that unevenness and trying to find where's that even playing field between our urban partners, for all the different technology advances that are out there. And so we want to be able to provide that as a healthcare provider. But if, say, the patient side of that equation doesn't have the capability of being able to receive it, it just really doesn't work. So those are type of things that are very important, that we make sure that everybody has the same sort of, broadband, but also speed of broadband. You hear that argument many times is, oh, it's there. Well, that's great and everything, but if it takes an hour to get, something done, well, they're really not getting the quality of care that they should be getting. I mentioned that on the care side, it does affect our primary care and specialty. It's really growing into a lot of our and the inpatient side too. So, there's a big push to try to reduce cost in healthcare across the board. And so is there ways to, do things, a lot cost sensitive in regards to having people that may need to be hospitalized, but do they really need to? That's maybe where the care provider is, and that's why they need to do that. But could they do that from home? So there's a lot of discussion around that, to be able to do that at home and having the providers monitoring them at home where they would rather be anyway. But if they don't have that broadband access, which is really, driving that provider to be able to watch over them, those type of advances aren't going to work. We talked about, we want to speak with our providers or our patients, so if it's through, the texting modes, if it's through our electronic medical records, but also the video. So, we don't want to lose that patient to provider, contact as to the visual piece. We already see that with masks, and so it's hard to be able to see the expressions and those type of things that have an impact on your care. And so, when you're not able to see them and you're only talking to them, say, through a phone line or a texting type mode, it really doesn't give you the full picture of what maybe is going on with that patient at home, if that's what you're trying to work on. Administratively. So I talked a little bit on the care side, and I'm not a care provider and I don't pretend to be. I'm more on administration. But in healthcare, there's the medical side, but we also have a lot of administrative functions that can be done efficiently by patients and ourselves as the provider to be able to use, electronic means. So if patients want to, pay their bill, online, those type of things. So now you're talking about broadband in those aspects. Looking at their records. So records are electronic for the most part these days. And so being able to have access to that, knowing your own health, being in charge of your own health, that's the big push. Not having the providers drive all the decisions. It's really the patient working with our providers, to make those best decisions, but having the ability to see, what's going on, and then being able to have that control over your health for the long term. And, and scheduling appointments. So, what's working for you and being able to do that from from home, online, those type of things versus having to wait maybe on the phone for appointments, depending on where you're trying to call. So many places are going to that to make it for a convenient standpoint for our patients, but it's convenient, but it's becoming the norm. So anything around this space, it's a normal thing. And so not having a normal situation for the broadband, it becomes difficult. Obviously, being able to have care at home, for those that may have transportation problems. So, we know in our rural communities, we do have transportation challenges. And so this is another way to get around that and being able to alleviate those when say a patient can't get here because they don't have transportation. And just a couple other things, checking in, there are those patients that have multiple comorbidities going on. And so just have that regular check-in. So instead of having them or ask them to come up to the provider's office or whatever, you can just quickly check in with them on a, say on a broadband standpoint or internet visit, to just see how things are going, so we can keep a pulse on making sure that it's not going south for them, that it makes things worse, worse off for their health. The last thing from Madison Healthcare Services standpoint is, yes, we're fine probably on broadband for us as long as it's working, but it's that redundancy side. So we expect, and our providers expect, and our patients expect that we're able to function, and we function basically with online things. That if that one avenue is shut down, we got to have that redundancy. So to go back to paper for say days or hours, I mean that's what's asked of them, but it's not realistic. And so from our perspective, it's having that redundancy option, so that we can make sure that we're functioning 24/7, 365, which our community is expecting us to do. So, thank you.
I think I'm next. Wayne Wormshead, Superintendent, Windham School District here in Windham, Minnesota. We're a pre-K through 12, about 1,250 kids. We've been growing about the last 10 years due to some employment growth here. A few things that we're seeing with that, of course, is our growth and diversity. We went from serving about 70 or 65 EL kids 10 years ago. Now we're well over 160 with that. We're also seeing in 2015, I'm a big proponent for equity for all. And we're seeing with our internet resources we have here because we have WindhamNet. And WindhamNet put in prior to that around 2008, 9, I believe it was, or before that even, they put in fiber to every home or access to that. So we started the process of going one-to-one iPads for our entire district. In about 2015, 16, we accomplished that. So that put us quite a few years ahead of some area schools when we're looking at that. But what happened is we really found out during the pandemic that in the spring, WindhamNet was accessed there, but some people weren't accessing it. And we had a real contingencies that were having the problem. So WindhamNet was kind enough at that time, and so was Back 40 and MVTV Wireless. They actually offered free access for all of our students that weren't online for that. Our issue was making sure we had devices, routers and things like that for them to use to get that hooked up. So my high school principal, and we actually spent time in people's homes hooking up their internet for them to help speed along that process. And by the first day that we had to start school up, we had all but 2 families between that and Pucks in our entire school district set up. And then also WindhamNet was kind enough to step up and actually gave all of our teachers the highest speed that they had on their fiber connection for us to serve kids. On the other end, some people, of course, on a Verizon Puck in the country or Back 40 or things like that, sometimes struggle with some of that speed issues with that. But we started to work through that, and that actually really set us up to realize that summer what we thought one-to-one was and how well we could be more effective with that. So we spent that summer before the fall of 20 really investing in our staff and training them to be even better at that piece. And that did pay dividends because we had to go 5 weeks to distance learning in November and December of last year for that. One of the biggest things we learned from this entire piece, starting with the one-to-one, then on the internet access, is affordable access for all, an equity issue. We went one-to-one because we had kids who could come into the school and have a $600 laptop, and other kids had nothing. So you had the disadvantage when we started moving our curriculum in different pieces to digital. We're seeing a greater distance between things. Now, what's come to light even more so from the pandemic, we knew this was there, but even more so was the difference in access to internet, 1, and 2, their speed of their internet, depending on where they live and their income levels that they have. So we're seeing a large disadvantage in our low-income families. And as we transition people from Puerto Rico, Central America, Mexico, South Pacific here, that difference in getting them hooked up and those items there to make sure that we're set. We don't have 100% coverage right now, and we work for that when we have an issue. Currently, we're in session. But what I see is if you're going to have a growing workforce, you're going to need this for access because some of the jobs are coming to rural Minnesota. The other thing is, I'm teeing this off to the next person, but if you really want to have a viable community, you need to have this for access because it's part of the way people want to live, from whether they're a high school graduate to a PhD in that. Access to internet and resources for taking place. And I think another viable thing that we keep on missing is when you have high-speed internet, broadband to your community, you can actually recruit and hopefully get people there who want to work and live from anywhere. You can do anything from anywhere once you have that. I mean, I don't even want to know where stuff gets shipped to my house from. You talk about shop local, but we can actually bring businesses in that are local to us that are actually doing business worldwide if they really want to. I think that's an aspect that we keep on missing on different pieces, on that connection, how that can work long term. I do know that we're going to see a bigger push as we start last year, seeing more kids take online courses that we provided through different providers. And that's just going to create a bigger demand, because that becomes a great access and resource for us to change our schedule. If I can't find teachers, and if you have noticed there's a massive teacher shortage, bus driver shortage in other areas there, but what takes place is if I need a physics, actually not physics, let's say chemistry teacher, or more likely a college calculus teacher for that, I probably may not be able to find those sometimes, or I have a scheduling conflict being a small school. I can actually just pick that off a accredited school or university to pull that into our school system. And it makes just more opportunities for all of our kids. And my son is a computer science and software engineer graduate next year. He did most of his work this last year at college, of course, remotely, but for the computer guy it worked really, really well for him to even do his internship. So the value of having the high-speed internet and for people to work from anywhere is obvious, but now you're looking at what our kids are learning faster and this next generation of workers and what's available and what they're becoming just in the last 2 years. Even schools that had not been one-to-one, how fast they've ramped up. They're changing that access for kids and families. It's going to make a big ripple effect long-term, I see, in what is available for the quality of workers and the skill sets they come to us with in the next 4 to 6 years. I talk pretty fast, but if you have any questions, I'm here to stick around. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Lang, and I'm the operations manager for a family business, Lang Ag Systems, and we're headquartered in Wilmer, Minnesota, and then we've got a satellite location in Fairmont, Minnesota. And we're a livestock equipment supplier and then a construction general contractor, primarily in the swine industry, but we also work with other species. Obviously our customers are in rural areas, and there's several ways which, specifically our customers rely on quality broadband. A few examples, these barns are have a fair amount of technology in them now, and there's controllers, ventilation controllers, barn controllers that control the temperature and the environment that the animal is in, and help them to be safe and to grow efficiently. These controllers you can access them remotely through the internet, through a laptop, an iPad, a cell phone, and some of the neat things that they do is you're able to modify the controls in the barn. You can review. It'll actually send you alerts if there's problems or potential problems coming up, high amp draws on motors. So it just helps them keep, be able to monitor what's going on inside of their barn without actually having to be there. And then farm sites have, remote monitoring systems that can automatically order animal feed, go right to the feed mill. So, there's got to be that, connectivity. And if there's a connectivity fail, or if it's not available, you're talking about feed outages and animal impact, impact to the operations. And then we're starting to see some farming operations too add cameras, whether it's security cameras outside or even cameras inside, to see what's going inside with the animals, with the livestock, and all of that requires good broadband access for them to review that wherever they're at. So, and then even farm sites are spread out from each other. One customer may have multiple grain handling or barns that spread out over several miles, and they need to communicate back to maybe a home office, and for record keeping and other reporting and barn monitoring. So it's a little bit about our customers. There's obviously a lot of other things like GPS and things that I'm not familiar with that customers, that farmers use in their tractors. But, specifically our business, we use broadband every day. Our employees leverage mobile applications to help them with navigation or job reports, pictures, videos getting uploaded to the website to be able to report what they're working on, how it's going. We use live video meetings just like this with participants from multiple states, connected back to a rural job site that we're managing. When it works, the video meetings help avoid miscommunications and allow for a personal touch to the meeting. And it really helps to build camaraderie with a team of subcontractors when we can see each other face to face. And then we're regularly sharing large files with employees, our employees that are out in the field at a rural work site or with a subcontractor, with an owner. The ability to receive those files, those documents nearly instantaneously via a mobile device is extremely important. It could be instructions, construction prints, emails, daily logs, photos, videos. And if that connection isn't sufficient, the files won't come through. There's delays. And we see that from time to time in the rural area. The projects that we're working on sometimes are 4 hours or more away from our home office, and we need to make regular site visits. And we've found that we can avoid and reduce those number of visits from our management team if we use on-site cameras to view activities. So we've got multiple cameras set up at a site, and there's a live feed of either video or still camera, so you can check the weather conditions, check who's on site. Those are very helpful, but again, they're very much contingent on what is available in the area for broadband access. And then probably the obvious thing too with COVID, we've increased the amount of time that we're working remote, whether it's from home or in a truck or in a farm site or whatever. And having access back directly to our servers is critical, and it helps efficiency for our customer, for our employees, and then the turnaround time back to our customers. So it's becoming an expectation. So that's all I wanted to share. Be happy to answer some questions too, if there's any.
Thank you, Ryan and Eric and Wayne. That was fabulous. Dawn, any final remarks?
No, I think we can go into question and answer period. I know that I'm sitting next to Jack, and there's been some questions that have been rolling in through the chat that may be relevant for many of our speakers. So we'll just maybe roll into that next section.
Yep. Take it away, Jack and Michelle. Jack, I think you're muted.
Apologies for that. Yeah, we've had a few questions come into the chat, and if any more come up, please feel free to drop them into the chat as we continue through the question and answer section of the forum, and we will make sure that they are read off. So the first question that came up was for Todd, and that question was, do any of the local finance tools get limited if they are looking to help incentivize providers in an area that has seen other federal investment, i.e. in areas of CAF or RDOF dollars?
Great. Yeah, bonding is independent of any other sources of funding. So it just goes on just the particular use in that statute that we issue the bonds from. So I think it doesn't limit it. I think I'm answering that, hopefully.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, next question that we had. The recovery funds will require prevailing wage because it is a federal program, correct? So I think someone just wanted clarification on that. It wasn't for a particular person.
I would think so. I'm just kind of guessing on that. That would increase the cost to the service provider a little bit. That would be a good question for those folks, like your CenturyLinks of the world, those folks.
And this is Diane. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I have to look for the FAQ on that.
Yeah.
I know that in the NTIA grant that I worked on, that it was mentioned as being a requirement. However, the provider we're working with addressed a potential concern that being in a rural area, it may be more difficult to find contractors with that. So I have seen that it is a requirement, but I think there is some practicality with it too.
All right. And then the next question that we had, it was a question for Eric. Besides video conferencing for consultations, is Madison Healthcare Services currently using any telehealth, telemedicine applications to deliver physical or mental health care?
Yeah, so yes, we are doing telemedicine for mental health, and that has been going on for a while. And I gave the one example in the chat box that we work with some kids in the school, and so those kids can stay in school, connect in with our providers here, and get it done that way. In regards to the question about physicals, I mean, when we were going through the main part of the pandemic, those are type of the services that got pushed out, unfortunately, due to that. And we did have a few patients that we did still do the physical, but a lot of aspects of that type of visit, you do need to have a physical connection with the provider and the patient. So there's not a lot of that going on online. And then we do have some specialties, and I think I mentioned it in my talk about connecting with some specialties that we may not have here on site. So.
Thank you for that. We have a two-part question here. I guess we'll just do the first part first. So, has there been an announcement from the U.S. Treasury on when the American Rescue Plan ruling is finalized? That's for anybody.
This is Diane. What I have read in the trade press is that the final rules should be out sometime this fall, and that the Treasury guidance on the capital projects funding should be out this month. The fact that they're not at the same time leaves me a little bit confused, but that's what I've read and heard.
All right, and then the next part, can a locality utilize, can a locality utilize their ARPA funds to serve as the local match for the deed border-to-border grant?
We don't know yet. It will depend on the Treasury guidance. So I can't answer that question yet.
Yeah, as far as we know, we think it can. And so we're kind of pushing in that direction.
Those were all the questions that I saw in the chat. So, anybody else have any other questions, comments?
Jack, I think there was a response about interim final rules that were just put into chat. And the other thing I just shout out as I'm monitoring on this end was Bernadine, thank you for putting in a good reminder of the award that the city of Windham received for courageous leadership from the Blinded Foundation on broadband. So there's been a lot of cool links, but yeah, please continue to look through that.
Yeah, sure. I do see a response from Bree here. She said the interim final rules were adopted on May 10th of 2021. And she said, yes, this fall they had comments for the public due through July 16th. And she said that she will follow up with our DC team and ask for an update from the Treasury.
Jack, it looks like there's a new response in from Diane about prevailing wage too. Jack and Michelle.
Yes, Diane comments that it looks like prevailing wage applies to broadband infrastructure projects.
Thank you all for the comments and the questions. Last call, Michelle and Jack. Any more? If not, we'll transition. Thank you both for moderating that and for everybody that submitted. Eric Day, I'll turn the floor over to you to introduce our final session.
Thanks, Scott. This has been some really great discussion, and I'm really happy to be here today. It's amazing how a utility that barely existed when I graduated from high school not that long ago is so critical now to our daily lives. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you two individuals who can help us close out our discussion. I'd like to introduce Benya Kraus, co-founder of Lead for America, executive director of Lead for Minnesota, and Bernadine Jocelyn, Director of Public and Policy Engagement for the Blandin Foundation. Benya and Bernadine, can you help us kind of close out our discussion by providing us with your thoughts and some recommendations for moving forward?
Yes, great. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction. We're going to use these next 15 minutes to do some regional prioritization around the themes that we heard today. It's going to be a little interactive to kind of spice up our Zoom time together. So I am dropping right now a chat to a Jamboard that is in there. If when you click that, I'm going to also at the same time share my screen so that you can see. If you are new to Jamboard, give a little bit of a tutorial here. We're going to be asking you 2 questions, and I'm also DJ as well. So we'll be asking you 2 questions. We'll have a few minutes for us to process and put sticky notes onto the Jamboard. And then at the end, we'll look through these comments all together and start having some discussions around what would we here in the Southwest region want to prioritize. So again, if you're new to Jamboard, you can add a sticky note by going right here to the left-hand side. Here, write a comment and just stick it right on there. And then you can move it around. And again, this is you can change up your colors and you write your comment and you can put it straight to the board. So with that, Bernadine's going to be facilitating us through the questions. If you prefer not to use the Jamboard, you can write your comments or your responses in the chat box. And I'm just going to screen share here and watch the chat box and can add any of the comments straight onto the document. Any questions for clarity on this before we dive in? Okay.
Good
Great.
job. Good job with the instructions, Benya. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being with us today. So yeah, feel free to just use the chat box or try out the Jamboard. It's not that, just click on that link. I'm going to be timing us. We're going to have 2 minutes for this first question. Ben is going to give us some mood music to inspire us. So use the little sticky there to share one opportunity you see for the region to improve broadband access.
And if you want to interpret this question as opportunities that your region is looking at right now, or projects that your community is looking at. You can put those again in the chat or write them straight onto the Jamboard.
Okay, everybody, that was our 2 minutes. We're going to move to our second question now. Thanks for all those good thoughts. And our second question is, what would your region need to move forward on that opportunity? Would your region need to move forward on that opportunity? So have at it.
There is a young cowboy, he lives on the range. His horse and his cattle are his only companions. He works in the saddle and he sleeps in the canyons, waiting for summer, his pastures to change. And as the moon rises, he sits by his fire, thinking about women and glasses of beer, and closing his eyes as the doggies retire. He sings out a song which is soft but it's clear, as if maybe someone could hear. Good night, you moonlight ladies, rock-a-bye, sweet baby Jane. Deep greens and blues are the colors I choose. Won't you let me go down in my dreams and rock-a-bye, sweet baby James. Now the 1st of December was covered with snow, so was the turnpike from Stockbridge to Boston. Lord, the Berkshires seemed dreamlike on account of that frosting, with 10 miles behind me and 10,000 more to go. There's a song that they sing when they take to the highway, a song that they sing when they take to the sea, a song that they sing of their home in the sky. Maybe you can believe it.
Okay, everybody. Gosh, it's hard to step on sweet baby James. But our 2 minutes are up for that question. Great.
Awesome.
Thanks for, you guys did a great job of, look at you using that Jamboard.
Yeah, I don't know who is the one in charge of making it look so orderly, but thank you. I know we're wrapping up in just a bit. So the kind of last piece here in terms of regional prioritization, if we want to just focus in on this slide right here, where we have the most comments, just take a moment to look at the themes here. And if you can then add a sticky note and say second to things that, as you're looking at what other folks are saying, that you would agree and want to lift up to. So you can add that straight to whatever sticky note that really resonates with you.
So as folks, great, yeah, take a minute to see what can add seconds. We'll get a better sense of the whole group's thing.
Just spend a few more seconds on here. We're seeing that there's a lot around being able to leverage county commissioners to invest and see the significance of broadband to their region and being able to leverage local dollars for what is coming down the pipe here. If anyone wants to come, I was going to say off chat, but it looks like we've got just a few minutes. So we'll take just a few more seconds to put your seconding, and we'll be looking at some of the key themes. Place here around education programs may also be linking to being able to put some pressure or advocacy at the local level for cost sharing or local level of investment as well. Public partnerships with local internet providers. Do we have anything else here around reaching local providers? Funding for hard to reach areas. Some talk here on the terrain. I'm seeing a lot here on the left-hand side around the seconding.
Good. Well, thanks for everybody for sharing your thoughts on this. And what's exciting about it is we're going to have a chance to line up this input and feedback from your region with what we're hearing from across the whole state. And I'm going to use this as an opportunity to encourage all of you to save the date and join us. I just threw in the chat there a link to the statewide broadband conference that Brandon is privileged to co-host with the Office of Broadband Development in October, the mornings of the 12th, 13th, and 14th. So we're going to share, roll up this information from across the state, including the participant survey that you're going to be asked to complete. And that survey really focuses a lot on the so what, now what of our gathering today. It was great to hear all these stories and opportunities, but Benya's been really good about pushing me and our team like, so now what are we going to do about it? And so that participant survey link that you'll get asks you to think about what is something you can do to help advance and improve broadband adoption and access in your region. So as we wind up our time here today, I want to just reiterate Blandin Foundation's and Benya's and my thanks to our local hosts for this regional event, especially the team at Southwest Regional Development Commission, the Upper Minnesota Valley Regional Development Commission, and Mid-Minnesota Development Commission, and of course, Southwest Initiative Foundation. You guys were great partners, and what a terrific lineup you brought to us this morning. Thank you so much for your support. And to each of you who joined us today, who took time to be here together and talk and think together about broadband in the region. I want to wrap up with an opportunity for those communities or townships or counties that are with us today that have the fire in the belly to do something about it. And one way you could do that is to join Blandin Foundation in our program. We are currently recruiting for cities, townships, or counties that want to work hard on developing their capacity to access the funding opportunities we heard about today. We have a new program called Broadband Accelerate. It's an intensive 16-week, 4-month program where we help you get a team, get a plan, and then move on that plan. And so if you're interested in learning more about what that might look like for your county, please reach out to me. I'm going to throw my contact information in the chat here, and we would be delighted to have the opportunity to work with you on that. So with that, we've come to the end of our 90 minutes today. And on behalf of all of the folks that came together to bring this meeting, I want to thank you, each of you, for joining us and participating. All the best wishes, and we hope to see you again in October, and we'll talk more about this from a statewide perspective. Thanks, everybody, for a great meeting.
Thanks, everyone. I will send us off with some good country music. Hold on. Thanks, everyone. We'll be sending notes.